Week 1 of the new Overwatch League season certainly did not disappoint. Aside from getting to watch a new game, the general results were pretty all over the place, which made for a very enjoyable week. Things were crazy unpredictable. Will Week 2 hold more of the same? Let's find out. Let's get into my Week 2 preview and predictions. Sadly, this week is going to feel short since there's only 9 games in 3 days compared to the 13 that we got last week. But if last week's wackiness is a sign of things to come, I'm sure that there's still going to be a lot of entertaining moments. This week's action is going to start with the Florida Mayhem versus the Vancouver Titans on Friday. After the very successful opening week that the Mayhem had, as well as Vancouver's unbelievable inconsistency, Florida are clearly favored in this position. Even though all of the offseason changes went through with them, Florida still did put together a relatively competitive squad from the looks of it. They looked very confident out there, and I was very impressed by their teamwork and playmaking abilities. With them playing arguably their weakest opponent yet, and the fact that the meta hasn't changed really, I gotta stick with the Mayhem here in a decisive 3-1. I'm gonna give Vancouver a map due to Florida needing to flesh out some things here and there, but I fully expect them to mostly be in control here. The Titans might have looked okay in that Boston series, but their lack of coordination against London is very concerning. They clearly had a very rough time dealing with rush compositions, which is something Florida don't mind running themselves. And even if Vancouver do make the adjustments needed in that regard, they're still outmatched basically any way you look at it, simply due to the fact that they have the stronger playmaking and teamwork on the side of Florida, so give me the Mayhem all day. Next we have the San Francisco Shock and Houston Outlaws matchup. This is big in terms of deciding the North American pecking order, so to speak. Not to mention that it's really the Shock's first big-time challenge so far. Consider this a key match of the week. It's a big game between two solid-looking teams. As of right now, it's a bit difficult for me to tell you who I definitively favor. Houston had a very competitive first week, but showed some major inconsistency thanks to the Toronto series. Then you have the Shock, who are dominant and consistent, but against two weaker teams in North America. I know the Outlaws can play well against good teams, but what can the Shock show me? The Shock have also yet to play against a Doomfist team, so there's a whole bunch of questions here. Do you believe in the discipline of the Shock, or the explosiveness of the Houston Outlaws? It's a difficult choice to make. So you know what? I'm going to throw out a random guess here. My pick belongs to the San Francisco Shock in a 3-2 victory. They're overdue for a win against Houston, so why not? I have no real way of knowing who wins for sure. It would make sense to go with the Outlaws in theory since their sample size is definitely more useful, but that's exactly why I probably shouldn't pick them, as weird as it sounds, because if last week taught me anything, it's that logic should probably just get thrown right out the window. Also keep in mind that Proper, Finn, and Kilo are very familiar with Pelican, aka Houston's primary playmaker. If they can make him feel uncomfortable out there, I am confident that the Shock can get the jump on them. I also just feel that they're slightly more versatile at tank and DPS, which only works more to their advantage. On the other hand, I could totally see this going Houston's way if they do well on Doom, and somebody like Lastro could maybe have a step ahead of Violet. Either way, we should be in for a bloodbath here. There's lots of marquee matchups to look forward to. Hopefully it delivers in the way that the Battle of Texas did not. Fingers crossed. On to game number 3, which is going to be the Atlanta Reign versus the Washington Justice. Much like Houston, the Justice were crazy inconsistent last week, and they'll be going up against a pretty tough Atlanta squad. Thanks to last week, it's pretty obvious that the Reign are way more well-rounded. Not only is Kai an excellent counter to somebody like Happy, but Nero looked better on Genji compared to Decay. Additionally, I still greatly favor the Atlanta support line. While someone like Krillin definitely played way better than I thought last week, he's still going up against one of the best Ana players early on. To me, the Justice simply get outpaced and outgunned. The Justice continue to be up and down as the Reign take the series in a sweep. Just like in the Dallas game, there's not a single thing that I prefer the Justice with, so it's reasonable to assume that a similar outcome is likely to ensue. Starting off Saturday is the London Spitfire and Boston Uprising. Not a super exciting matchup on paper, but still kind of interesting if you ask me. Boston had a very weird first week. They almost lost to the Vancouver Titans, but also managed to take a map off the LA Gladiators. But now they're facing a team that 3-0'd that same Titans team they almost lost to. Does that mean London have a chance? I'd venture to say yes. Boston are anything but invincible. If London can effectively play Winston and Ryan comps as they did in the Vancouver series, they have a real shot. However, in the end, Boston are still favored. For starters, their tank versatility is noticeably stronger. Hadi, in my opinion, has largely been unimpressive so far, while the likes of Punk and Marvel have shown some decent results. The big X factor in this scenario is how much better they are with Doomfist comps compared to Vancouver. In my personal opinion, London likely will have difficulty dealing with a solid Doom comp, and that's on top of the idea that Boston likely have an idea of how to counter their less prevalent rush comps thanks to the film. Oh, and let's not forget that Boston are fielding playmakers at support and DPS with higher ceilings. In spite of all of this, something weird in my brain is telling me that London make this a game, because again, I'm convinced that logic doesn't mean anything currently. Due to their confidence after a 3-0, they punch above their so-called weight class and make Boston earn this. I feel like the Uprising should have this pretty easily, but at this point I'm willing to bet that some craziness is about to go down. Speaking of craziness, how about we move into maybe the most exciting match of the week? Gladiators versus Fuel in a long anticipated matchup between two of the biggest early season contenders in North America. Needless to say, this one is a key match of the week without a doubt. This is one of the most important games of the Kickoff Clash qualifiers. Are these two evenly matched like we think, or will one of them not live up to expectations? In my opinion, we're in for a great game here, as both teams are explosive, they're versatile, and filled with stars. In terms of who I favor, I actually lean slightly towards the Fuel in a 5-mapper. Despite a not so great performance against Houston, I'm still convinced that everything is fine with Dallas. There's a good chance that they simply were not prepared for that Doomfist, and since the Glads prefer Winston-based comps anyway, that works more towards their advantage for obvious reasons. It gives me a lot more confidence that the Dallas tanks can come out on top in a majority of composition choices. There's also the fact that I strongly believe that Dallas are boasting a huge advantage at flex DPS. While Kevster could definitely have his way with Edison, you probably feel a bit better about Edison and how he fares against Kevster than you do with Patty Pan taking on Sparkle in a Genji duel. Dallas do well in a lot of places in this type of meta. They match up well with some advantages while also canceling out some of LA's big playmakers like at flex support, let's say. I'm confident that Fielder can handle somebody like Shu, especially in an Ana meta. I mean, generally, in this kind of dive-heavy meta, I'm gonna favor the Fuel. The Glads may be coming off the cleaner week, but I just can't get myself to pick them here. I believe it's going to be close, seeing as the Glads are very capable, but when it comes down to who makes the game-defining plays in this kind of meta, you've gotta trust the Fuel. Now for a game on the opposite side of the spectrum in terms of overall team trust, the Titans and NYXL. I've gotta let it be known here that I am terrified for the NYXL. They looked extremely out of whack last week. This is definitely an opponent they can handle, and they should certainly be favored from a talent standpoint. Because this is a Kuki-led team with some great players, I'd like to think that they learn from some of their mistakes and show us a better performance. But let me tell you, if this ends up being a close series, which it very well could be, the NYXL are in deep trouble. Due to their play last week, this game is definitely not a guaranteed win, and I'd almost even consider it to be a trap game. If those boys aren't on the same page, the Titans could give them a major scare, just as they did with Boston. I would not be surprised in the slightest. However, this should, and I say that very loosely, this should be an NYXL victory, so I'm going to give it to them in 4 maps. My reasoning is simply due to the fact that I prefer their coaching as well as their lineup outside of main support. Kellen should do really good against False in a Winston mirror match, and I firmly believe that the DPS and Myungbong will have a much greater presence this time around. There's less pressure on them compared to what they dealt with last week. The individual matchups simply work more in their favor. If this game does not result in a New York victory, I'm gonna be very sad. Please do not mess this up. I know you're struggling, but this is a golden opportunity. If I'm the NYXL, I make sure to prep good for this game. I know it seems like an easy opponent, but you need every win you can get. On that note, we're on to the final day of matches. Starting us off is an interesting pairing between the Outlaws and Mayhem. Florida's Dark Horse saga continues as they get another shot to pull off an upset this week, and after what I saw the week before, I'd say they definitely do have a shot here. They're the underdogs for sure, but they have a lot of good stuff going for them. For starters, they've already shown that they can punch above their weight class due to the Atlanta game. Second of all, the Paris match showed us they can beat you down really good if you're not ready for them. Thirdly, they've got some underrated playmakers who can make some huge differences here. And lastly, Houston showed a potential inability to close out a series during that Toronto match. Combine all these factors together and suddenly we could be looking at another Houston choke. Do I personally see it happening? No, I don't, but I do suspect that it'll be awfully close, like closer than some people think. My prediction is going to be a 3-2 in favor of Houston. Could 5 maps maybe be giving Florida too much credit? Perhaps, but think about it like this. Houston have a tough game against the Shock to prepare for as well. They may not prioritize Florida enough, leading to the underdogs making them sweat. However, my prediction is that they do end up weathering the storm in that final map, because there's 2 game breakers that put Houston in the driver's seat. One is Pelican, who is by far and none the best DPS in the lobby. The other is going to be Dante's Doomfist, as Florida definitely did have difficulty in that second half of the Atlanta series adjusting to Hawk's Doom. He constantly put pressure on the backline in a way that I'm confident Dante could do as well, and I'm not entirely convinced that a week of time is enough for the Mayhem to learn from those mistakes. The Doomfist comps and Pelican's Wrath lead the way to a close Houston win. Now for a battle between the Shock and NYXL. You know, a couple of months ago, I would have been pretty excited for this one, but due to New York's concerning state, I'm a little worried that this ends up being a blowout. I really want to believe that the NYXL can bounce back, but they need to show me evidence before I, and I'm sure a lot of you, are ready to put more faith in their abilities. It's not even like a skill/talent gap to me, it's a team gap, as in these 2 rosters are on different levels in terms of synergy, coordination, and confidence. If you look back at week 1, they were polar opposites. The Shock were confident, they were composed, they were decisive. The NYXL, on the other hand, they were one-dimensional, they were slow, and very unsure of themselves. You tell me who wins in that scenario, and what makes this even more Shock-favored is the fact that we're not going to be asking questions on how they do against high-level teams like in that Houston game, because the NYXL, they're on the weaker spectrum currently, and we've already seen what the Shock can do against people who don't know what they're doing. Give me the Shock and a very easy 3-0. It's just an all-around team diff here. I've got nothing else to say, so let's move on to the final game of the week. Paris versus Toronto. To be completely honest, I'm pretty on the fence with both teams. Paris greatly disappointed me during week 1, while Toronto left me more confused than anything else. I'd love for this to be a super tight game where it's hard to call a winner, but right now that's not something I can do. Just based on performance, it's clear that Toronto should be favored. To put it simply, they looked competitive, and Paris mostly did not. The Eternal had their moments, but they came in spurts rather than on a consistent basis. From what I can tell, they're doing good things during fights, but there's like this lack of communication on how to finish them. Toronto may have struggled themselves at certain points, but at least they showed they can adjust, and more importantly, take down strong opponents. I'm still not entirely convinced their DPS lineup is strong enough to win consistently, but it's clear to me that in this meta, the rest of their team can help pick up the slack. I get this feeling that Muse will have himself another solid outing just as he did in the Houston series. I'm not convinced that Paris can keep up in that type of mirror match. Paris in theory don't match up terribly, and yet I find it very hard to trust them in their current state. Toronto are rocking with more star power, largely thanks to the likes of Chirong and Twilight, and with their team more clearly being in a better spot, I'd be a fool not to favor them. Due to their inconsistencies, I'm willing to say that they drop a map as they go on to win 3-1. One thing to note here is it's clear that a DPS takeover could absolutely ruin Toronto though. If Naga can maybe have one of his classic performances, or Glister can channel his inner Happy on the Widowmaker, they could quickly end up getting overwhelmed. The Paris DPS have a chance to completely open up this match. But again, due to the team's general struggles, I don't have it in me to believe that this is a likely outcome. I really want to say that Paris have a good series, but much like a few other teams, they need to build up some trust first. Let's see what they're made of. But until then, that's where we end today's predictions. It may be a short week, but there's a lot to look forward to. There's so many questions that I'm very excited to see get answered. I would say that I'm hoping for like a better record or something this week compared to the 8-5 that I had in week 1, but I kinda hope that things continue to remain unpredictable as it only makes the league that much more enjoyable. Anyway, that's gonna do it for me, folks. If you enjoyed the video, give it a like, and consider subscribing to my channel if you enjoy Overwatch League discussions just like this. And feel free to leave your own preds for the week down in the comments below. I'd love to hear your opinions. And as always, thank you all so much for watching my content. I appreciate you so much, and until next time, this is ATP, signing out. Peace.